Welcome, everyone, to another edition of Why It Matters. I'm Tracy Kronzak.
And I'm Tim Lockey. Thanks for joining us. We're really excited for the guest that we have today. And we are going to jump right in. Hi, Tracy. How are you doing?
I'm great.
How's your week been? Good?
Week has been good.
Awesome.
Yeah,
Mine too.
I'm also super excited. We have a lot of stories to cover. So we're going to forego our usual protracted intro where we poke fun at each other and get right into it.
Yeah, great. So this week we are joined by one of our really great friends. I would say this is our stalwart guest. Would you agree with that?
Stalwart is such a great word for our guest today.
Exactly,
it really is. Like stalwart in that like rhinoceros kind of context, you know? Yeah.
I have no idea what that means.
Okay. Did you know the rhino was an early symbol of the LGBT movement because they are docile, however, extraordinarily vicious when provoked. And it seemed to make a good symbol for the early LGBT organizers in the 70s and 80s, particularly coming out of New York City. And I think that version of stalwart is what defines part of our guest.
All right. Sounds great. Yeah, I was thinking more penguin, but
no, I've never thought of penguins once. I don't know where you're getting that from.
Me either. It just came to me.
Yeah, no, I don't know
so
why.
Without further ado, we are very, very excited to have Ryan Ozimek from Soapbox Engage, PICnet, Joomla, like history upon history upon history. Join us. Ryan, thanks so much and welcome to the show.
I'm stoked to be here. Thank you, guys.
We want to start with your history. Can you give us just some of the high points, because we do not have the amount of time it would take to really dive into your history, but some of the high points of your history with nonprofits and technology.
Oh, shoot. Because I was going to start with July 4th, 1977 and just take it from there. But
wait, are you born on the 4th of July?
I can't be more all-American than being born on the 201st anniversary. Yes.
I saw that movie with Tom Cruise. It was very traumatic.
That's been my life. No, luckily my life. Yeah, no, thank you guys for having me. And yeah, it's been a wild ride. I mean, I tell folks, so our company PICnet has been around for almost 21 years now. And people are like, wow, what are you talking about? Like, that doesn't make any sense. And sometimes I think the same thing. But yeah, the brief history is I did graduate school in public policy at UCLA. And while I was there, I was like, man, I'm paying my way through college and grad school by doing database consulting, which is like FileMaker Pro, old school stuff. I was like, oh man, this is great. I get to use Apple computers. I get to like make some money on the side and then try to go to class when I'm actually paying attention. And I thought, well, wouldn't it be great if I could take like all this policy background and my passion for technology and being somebody who's born and raised in Silicon Valley and like do something with kind of the mashup of all that together. And back in grad school, me and one of my friends started PICnet to be able to say, wouldn't it be fantastic to start a business that helped nonprofit organizations get the technology they need in an affordable fashion to like go make the world a better place. And this is before like there was a Twitter, there was a Facebook, there was barely blogging, like the web browser had come out.
This is 5 years like prior. We're talking 2000, like right after the Y2K crisis, right?
Right.
Like that's what,
I think all we had was LiveJournal back in that day.
Exactly. You had your GeoCities, which obviously you had your website on like a home page somewhere that Yahoo gave you back in the day.
We had Earthlink. And we also had Topica, which Topica was great.
And without going too far into it, like this probably some of our discussion today about community, one of the things I did in high school in the Bay Area was actually take our high school newspaper and put it onto a bulletin board service in Silicon Valley called the Virtual Valley, which was before the web. This is prior to the web. This is prior to America Online. This is people who knew how to use a modem, could connect to something, and you could go to the virtual valley. And I posted news postings from our high school newspaper, thinking that anybody cared. And I cared. I thought it was the coolest thing that's ever happened. Like, the modem, like, yes. That's what I was doing. I needed to make sure all of the Los Gatos High School students knew what was going on in the bulletin board service world. I don't think anybody.
That was like what, 2 years after the movie War Games came out. Like that is amazing. I think like I want to just make an early observation, Ryan, that you have been ahead of the curve since since being in high school and with your newspaper. That's just incredible. So
it's been a fun ride to be able to take that, apply the technology, apply some policy. I spent a little time in the Clinton White House in the press office, so I got to see what was happening over there. I said, well, why don't I go out to DC and figure out how to build a business to make this stuff happen? So I wanted to be in the epicenter of where nonprofits were and bring technology from Silicon Valley and California. And I'm sitting in an office here with a bunch of penguins in Washington, DC, still across the street from the White House. So not a lot has changed in terms of geographic locations, but it's been a crazy ride since then. So it's cool to be here.
I think that is the context in which I first met you back at the N10 conference, and I think it was 2008. I can't remember where it was. We were hypothesizing that was New Orleans, but you've always been a person that technology delights, in my observation. And even if it's like never to be used again, like Joomla, for example. Who uses Joomla, Ryan? I don't know. But like that context, that joy is so rare in humanity. I just want to say, like, thank you for finding us in that world too, because yeah, I think when I first met you, I was like trying to figure out, because PICnet was in the hard cabling business for a little bit, and I was trying to figure out how to wire my office. And your observations were, don't you dare let them put in Cat 3. You should only put in Cat 5 or Cat 5e. And I was like, I don't know, man. Cat 5e or Cat 5.3 is cheaper. And you're like, Cat 5e does nothing, or Cat 5.3 does nothing. It barely does, by the way. You might as well just put in like phone lines for what Cat 3 does. But and then you were also like, or you could do the whole thing Wi-Fi. And I was like, Wi-Fi is like so slow, and who needs that when I can plug it in? And that's been like 14 years of friendship now, like those kind of conversations, and the topics just change.
Those technology struggles, we keep pushing through those, and then that's creating the sparks of innovation, that's helping us say, for me, like hearing those stories and kind of thinking about where we've been just reminds me that for me, the passion around technology isn't about the gadgetry part of it. It's about applying it to do something with it, to see a system that's broken and to know that there might be a way to do it better without having to try to rebuild the entire system from the ground up. Like, well, what happens if we could apply something in a new way that people aren't thinking about yet? And I just love getting a chance to do that. So yeah, from wiring cables to everything else.
Yeah, and you do have a long history of being of wide exploration around technology. It's one of the things that I was like, when we get to just hang out informally and talk about what's new, whether that's crypto, whether that's electric cars, like what you just always, what's next, how do you use it? I just think that that's really interesting. So
I think we're lucky to have found professions that is in an industry that's constantly changing. A lot of people hate that. A lot of people want to know that, like, I'm going to go into a profession. It's been there for thousands of years. It's going to be the same. We all going to know. You climb up this ladder. Like, I'm just not as interested or fired up about that. Like, I want things that are going to be changing a lot, and figuring out how to put those to practical use is what really gets me going. And so I agree. Like, as there's new things happening, I want to figure out, like, what's the way in which we can use this to do some good in the world? And I feel like the two of you and other folks like us are kind of looking at it through that lens as well, not just like, ooh, this is gee whiz technology, but like, awesome, now how do we apply this to do awesome things? And I feel as though that oftentimes gets lost because so many folks are like gravitating towards the shininess of the new technology and less about like what's the pragmatic application of it. If you were to title this podcast or interview with a very pragmatic centrist technologist, that wouldn't be far from the truth. That's kind of how I feel about things.
Yeah. Okay. Two big
Are
questions.
you saying that
One
I'm a
is-
right-wing technologist? Sorry.
Yeah, absolutely.
Took me a
We've
second
gone
to
from
parse
rhino
that.
to that.
All
Yeah,
right.
that's great.
Sorry, Tim. Please, we're
No,
going to dig
no,
back
no.
into that. Please go, Tim.
Yeah, absolutely. I know people are gonna want to know 3 why questions here. The first is gonna be why penguins?
Right. Am I going to answer these now, or is there going to be a
Yeah,
long list of these questions?
No.
Okay.
We'll just
They're good for
Flash.
oil.
flash question.
Right. They didn't hear you. They didn't hear you.
Yeah, that's
So the brief reason for that, and man, Tracy and I could probably go off in ages on N10, NTCs and whatnot, but I'm a big open source proponent, which might be one of the other why questions, but as a big open source proponent in the open source software community world, a penguin has oftentimes been the animal that represents or has been representing that kind of element of the software and technology world. So way back in the day, I know that there were some folks out there like Gunner and Aspiration Tech and some others that would have events like Penguin Days. And way back in 2005, 2006, I thought it'd be great to be able to say, well, gosh, like we are big proponents of open source software. It'd be great to be able to have some sort of way to express this in a cute 3-foot tall inflatable manner. So the penguin from the open source community and encouraging people in the nonprofit space to learn more about that and the opportunities around building communities around open source software led to the penguin just being the obvious choice for PICnet and Soapbox Engage.
gotcha. Okay. Next why is why open source then?
Oh man, that's deep. That's really deep. I think if we're going to be talking about technology and how and what it means and how it can be applied, I feel like I want to be able to democratize technology as much as possible so that can be put to the best use. And that typically means getting into the hands of as many people as possible. And I also think that the more that folks are able to tinker with, play with, modify, adapt, and continue to create around the technology, the more opportunities we have to just make the world a better place. So for me, open source software has always been an opportunity for us to like really leverage those key ideals of saying, what if we were to use this for good? What if we could get us in as many hands as possible to like make as much change as possible? The more open, the more transparent, the more accountable, all of those things are just critical to making that happen. So for me, open source software is a way to getting to that. So I'm very passionate about that because I feel like there's a lot of wisdom that we can get from people using technology in ways we've never thought of before.
Perfect. That is a perfect segue into the next one, which is why nonprofits?
Oh man, that's really good. As a young person, I was raised with a Catholic father that sent me to the Jewish Community Center in the summers, and a Jewish mother that sent me to a Christian school as a kid. And that mix of communities and getting a sense of like what people can do together and band together to just like do awesome things through these different communities and the cross-cultural experiences of that just made me realize that I was really passionate about the opportunity for us as just citizens of the world to band together. And one of the things I thought was really interesting these days, especially as it's been evolving for me, I'm passionate about what's happening in the nonprofit space because we're choosing as societies to, well, at least in the United States here, I should say, we're choosing to move away from large federal state governments of doing things, generally going down that path, and instead choosing to have other entities kind of fill the gaps. And I feel like if there's ever been a time, no, I'm not saying I agree or disagree with that viewpoint, but if there's ever been a time for the nonprofit, non-government sector to really step up, it's now more than ever. Like, I feel like society is just at a challenged point where if we're having trouble agreeing as to how we're going to be governed and govern ourselves in a democracy, then it's going to be the social sector. It's going to be nonprofit organizations. It's going to be NGOs that need to lead the way. And I can't imagine a better way to spend our lives than applying things like technology to that sector. So we've got a fighting chance. Like, we've got a fighting chance as a society to be able to do something right when we're just making a lot of, I think, short-sighted decisions. And I feel as though the nonprofit space has a huge opportunity to step up and fill gaps where we're just not able to do together functionally in many democracies. Now, that's a huge discussion. I know you didn't mean to go into that, but like, I am so passionate about that. I'm so tethered to that concept of, well, gosh darn it, if people in society are choosing not to do this through government, like, we need to find ways as nonprofit organizations in the social sector to like make sure society has what it needs to be successful beyond just business success. And I feel like there's a lot riding on the shoulders of the nonprofit community, and no better place to be able to help out.
I want to come back to, and I know Tracy wants to come back to open source and business around that. Yeah, I know, lots.
There's
the
a lot
last
there.
why question.
Yeah.
Oh, tons there. The last
So
why
much.
question is, why community?
Yeah. What's the saying? If you go it alone, you'll go fast, but if you go together, you'll go farther. Like, I really believe that there's such it's really weird as a young person growing up with divorced parents as a kind of pseudo only child for my early years. Like, I became very independent and very adultish at like the age of 5, like way too like adulty as a young kid. And I always felt this sense of independence. Is why I started my own business. It's why I did my own consulting gig when I was in college. Like, just that independence part of me, kind of a capitalist experience of saying I want to be an entrepreneur, was really important to me. But I realized what was lacking was that sense of community to go the distance, to go further. And I knew I couldn't do that on my own. I was passionate and I was self-directed, and I could light a fire under my own feet, but you can only take that so far. Like, you need a community along with you to make that happen. So it's just been really natural for me to say, well, gosh, if I can get other people fired up, like if I can work with other people that get fired up, like you all, then we can do some really great stuff. And I would much rather do that in the arms of fellow community members than, on my own. So I've always been really interested in that. As soon as I realized you can only go so far on your own so long, and after that, it's gonna take a crew of good friends to be able to take us the rest of the way.
And that's translated into how many NPSP events with how many people, like, just rough guess. I think what people don't realize is you've traveled the world motivating people that you've never met that show up on a certain day and spend a day with each other learning around sticky notes. I've seen it happen in Montana. I've seen it happen in India. I've seen it happen on both coasts and in the middle. Like, I've seen it over and over, this community that you create. And I think people just can't know that unless they've seen it. But just some of the numbers out there, like how many NPSP days?
Yeah, we've done almost 40. For folks that don't know, NPSP, the Nonprofit Success Pack, is part of the Salesforce nonprofit community. NPSP days are a community gathering of bringing folks together to be able to learn more about how to use this Salesforce technology for nonprofits in a way that is open to everybody. We've done at least 40 of those. We've served over 1,500 organizations, I think almost 2,000 individuals. It's been everywhere from Cape Town, South Africa, to India, to Vancouver, British, everywhere in between. So it's got a global reach, I think is fantastic. And I think the opportunity to be able to see things like that growing goes back to just some common tenets I have. Like, I believe knowledge should have no limits. Like, we need to get information. We need to be able to help people be educated as they need, from financial literacy to technology literacy to everything in between, because the world needs all of it from everybody right now. And being able to do that and watch people light up as they, as the light bulb goes off over their head, and they can say, oh yeah, I get it now. And the next step is them taking what they've learned to do something to like go better themselves, their family, their neighbors, their communities. Like, that's just inspiring. I'm inspired just by those people that show up to want to learn on their own as well too. I don't know. There's just a lot of opportunity there. This feels really exciting.
Yeah.
I have like 5 million questions and follow-ups for you, Ryan. Sorry, I just let my dog into she has this routine where she must lay on the chair behind me at all costs. So like otherwise, one, I had no idea you had a master's of public administration, and maybe that's just my own insecurity where I have that shit emblazoned all over my LinkedIn profile. So that was new information to me. I'm like, you're getting every freaking dot, title, and thing that I get on LinkedIn, because damn it, I need to be looking legitimate here. Two, can we tell the story about the booth bombing?
Yes.
Okay, so here's and why I want to say this is because it does lead into a question, and that is, so the very first N10 conference where I actually met you, Ryan, it was like, okay, if you want to talk about like wiring stuff, go talk to this guy, Ryan. And I did, and I met you, and then there were parties and stuff that happened and so forth. That night I came in at like 1 a.m. and you were piling inflatable penguins on the Microsoft booth. And I actually remembered why that was while you were talking. And it was because at the time there was some sort of like lawsuit around like documents and document accessibility from Word, Excel, and PowerPoint. And there was like this thing that everybody wanted, and that was people wanted Microsoft Office for Linux. And then that's what that was all about, was, Microsoft Office for Linux. And thank God we don't have that, by the way, because Linux has a giant user base, globally, that is deeply impacted by its absence, but nevertheless. So, the question I have, truly, because I think, Ryan, one thing I deeply admire about you is you have retained idealism where I have not. And that is just true. And therefore, what I see in the power of community, I absolutely agree with you on. I'm like, oh my God, if I had no place to land 15 years ago, where would I be now? I don't know. But if I didn't have a place to land then, I know I would be in a different place than I am now. So I am just like really deeply touched to be reminded of that power. And at the same time, I have to ask, where's the line between everything is wide open and freely accessible, and the line between making a pragmatic business out of selling software? Like, where does that land for you?
Yeah, that's a good question. I feel like part of the premise of this is when would a private enterprise be more effective than hoping that the masses figure it out on their own?
Exactly. That is the premise. You're spot on.
Yeah.
Right.
And I feel like what's been interesting to me, and this might be just dumb luck, and it might be because I look at all of these crazy opportunities that I've been lucky enough to take advantage of, and just say, like, we've just got to make the most of this life. We have to have fun. We've got to smile. We've got to like wear like penguin hats on very official podcasts, right? And I can't help but think, like, one of the things I remember doing early on when in the early days of our business, we were here in DC, and it was soon after 9/11, and we had in DC here a marathon. It was like the DC Marathon, and it was canceled 4 days before the marathon was run. Now, I knew some personal friends of mine then who it's been like weeks, months, like been training their entire lives since a baby, like trying to run a marathon. Here they were getting ready to do it. And it was canceled for reasons that ended up being like the business, I think, behind the marathon had some issues. And so they canceled it, but they said, oh, it's because of like a security threat. There wasn't a security threat. So I said, well, gosh, like maybe there's a way in which me and my co-founder can actually use this technology that we're trying to figure out on our own, like the early 2000s, to like get people to still run the marathon. And so like we built a website, which was just weird. And then we like encouraged people to like go to this website and then to tell their friends that the marathon was still going to happen because we as a community were going to put on the bloody marathon, even if the people that were being paid hundreds of thousands of dollars as event organizers had bailed on the community. Well, guess what happened? 4 days later, I think it was like 4,000 people, 3,000 people ran a marathon, the only unofficial DC marathon that's ever been run, with the help of the police department, with the help of local community members, with the help of little kids pouring lemonade and water, and they made it happen. And I feel as though what I've learned through all of my community experiences is that where oftentimes there has been a singular power that has failed the people, oftentimes a community, if they're passionate enough about it, if they get fired up about it, if they have something kind of like helping them get pointed in the right direction, are able to overcome those challenges. And I think it's just been one thing like that after another, where I see community just stepping up to the table and doing the things that everybody else thought just couldn't be done or wasn't going to happen. So I feel as though those failures by larger institutions or by singular institutions present opportunities for communities to grow. And that is, you'll see that throughout my last 20 years of professional history. But I think from a business perspective, what's funny is that we're big proponents of open source software, but we ourselves at PICnet don't necessarily contribute a whole bunch of open source software back to the community. We contribute to the open source community through running events, stirring up community discussions, getting people involved to make software better. So for me, it's less about should businesses always be defined by like the license type of the software that they contribute. That kind of makes less sense to me in 2021 and beyond as we're moving to this cloud thing. And more about it is kind of the underpinnings of this to what are we doing? What's the best way to assemble people to get a job done? So Tracy, that's like a poor punt to your question, but it feels as though like it depends on what we're trying to achieve together.
Well, I mean, I'm hearing two things in what you're saying. And I'm going to revisit one of my favorite quotes of all times. This movie quote stuck with me in, 1997. And to me, it's just as relevant now. And that is Tommy Lee Jones, Men in Black, talking to Will Smith. And the quote is, a person is smart, right? But people are dumb, panicky, dangerous animals, and you know it, right? So, that is my reference for community. I don't always see people personally en masse as a good thing. And from my worldview, it's because I've experienced deleterious outcomes when people have gathered en masse, usually to make their point known about people like me, right? Now, that said, what I actually am hearing you articulate, and by the way, half the time when we kibitz about this stuff, I'm just playing devil's advocate to get your ire up, and I think you know that.
You always do a good job of that too.
I know, I do, because you're like, stop it. But what I'm actually hearing you say is open source, the term that I think a lot of us are used to thinking about as a development repository on GitHub, for example, that abides by certain preordained agreements regarding its availability. Open source is an expansive term that is actually a request for transparency, authenticity, community, and participatory engagement in the tools that are being purported to serve the people in the first place.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that I used to say, so I was the president of an organization called Open Source Matters. Mm-hmm. I'm not kidding you, that was the name. It still exists. It's actually doing pretty good work for some open source communities. But one of the things I used to say is that it was transparency, accountability, and empowerment. And the empowerment piece I feel is really, really important to me. When you get to work in open source software communities, you begin to see that like boundaries, like geographical boundaries, just don't matter anymore. And the number of people that could be in India or Australia or wherever around the world that want to contribute and be part of it, it's important. So internationalization becomes important. Being able to take contributions from people around the world at different time zones become important. And if you're going to think about that way, then the opportunity for us to really focus on empowerment is really critical. So I think that it's tougher to empower folks to be passionate, to feel that they've got some autonomy in what they're doing, to feel like they're going to master something. If you say, but actually, we're going to hold all the stuff here. You get to see the stuff that we give you, but like it's up to us to hold the rest of it. And you just need to trust us. So I feel as though in the open source software communities I've been a part of, the more open, the more transparent, the more they're leaning into how do we empower these folks to do great things, the more likely they are to be really successful. And I've just been amazed to see what people have done in the Salesforce world, as Tracy, you and I, way back in the Google Groups days, and even earlier than that. And Tim, we've seen for the last 15 plus years or so, every time I've seen the ability of the community to level up, to be empowered, to be able to do things, is the times where I see light bulbs go off, where I see real creative juice, where I see new things happen that are going to make the world a better place. So that's where I really lean into the empowerment side of it.
How do you govern that? And that's actually my legit question. And I say this half tongue in cheek, and that is, I gave up on Mozilla Firefox about 5 years ago because when I launched it, the lights would dim, right? It was like ENIAC, right? And, so there obviously has to be limits on this governance. And it is my worry, and it is my sincere worry, that when everybody has something to say and everybody is equally valid, nothing gets done, which to me is the role of, private ownership of things, because it's like, look, well, everybody can't say everything. So if somebody had to do something and we did this. So how do you balance that governance is my question.
One of the things I've always leaned into is being part of an open source community is a community that's focused on gift giving. And a lot of people don't get that, and they think it's just hogwash, or think it's ridiculous.
That's very profound, Ryan. I like that.
That's really important to me. And if you're in the act of giving a gift, hopefully in most cases, you're doing it for the benefit of somebody else. You're doing it hopefully without expecting something in return. So for me, people that are contributors, true contributors back to a community, like I think they're the ones that get to have a say. And I'm very interested in some of the latest like blockchain communities and cryptocurrency communities that say those who contribute, those who give, those who are involved either financially or from a code perspective, or they're writing smart contracts or whatever that might be, like they're the ones that we're going to give the ability to be able to determine the fate of where this community is heading. And governance is based on contribution. Now, that isn't always the most democratic way of handling it, and there's other ways to deal with that. What I think is interesting in the technology side is that it is not impossible, but sometimes can be difficult for people to say, well, that's great, but I'm going to fork this community to try to do something similar but different, because what's happening over here just doesn't make sense anymore. So that threat of making it easy for a community to then be forked and then something running parallel means that the folks building the strong communities, like they need to be on their best behavior. They should be doing what's best for the community. So bringing that all together from a governance perspective makes me feel like we've got to go back to those tenets. Like how are we making sure everything we're doing is transparent? How do we make sure that the people that are in charge are accountable for what they're doing through that transparency? And then how do we make sure everybody's got an opportunity to contribute and be empowered? I think we've got more of an opportunity to do that in the blockchain world than we've ever had before. And I wish we had these tools a decade, 5 years ago. And I think there's some good innovations that can come from it as well too.
It's interesting that both of you, I don't remember exactly what you asked Tracy, but it was something like, okay, what about like private business versus government or whatever? And both of you had Like when I hear private business, I think profit maximization. So I know that's because I'm an economist. But your perspective, both of you, is like, Ryan, I think your answer to it was like, oh, well, it's whichever one is best to meet that need. Like that's the weirdest way of thinking about that. Like let's look at the best way to meet this need and then, and then do that. It's just such a different way of engaging. And it runs parallel to what you're talking about here, Ryan, with if your perspective on the world is that people will come and offer something too, and everybody, including them, gets something back in return from that, that's not altruism. And I want to be really clear here. I think in the nonprofit world and in the open source world, there's an assumption of, I'm only doing that out of goodness of my heart. And I just don't buy, like, I'm very suspicious of altruism. I'm not suspicious of it's good for more than just me. And so a cooperativism instead of a competition model actually makes a lot of sense. And so Ryan, I mean, one of the mysteries you are to me is how are you open source and a business leader? Because I'm used to open source being like developers who have this idealism about the world. And then, and then I'm like, good luck with payroll, and you, like, it isn't good luck with payroll. You've had some people on payroll for over like 15 or
Yep.
20 years. Like you're succeeding at things that other business owners are failing at, and you're doing it with this perspective. And I just think it's important to hold both of those together because we don't have that many models of it. So thank you for modeling that.
No, I appreciate that. And sometimes I feel like I'm following a very pragmatic approach that tries to keep into account my ideals. So Tracy, it's always nice to hear somebody like you reflect to say like, you're the type of person, Ryan, that has like kept true to some of these ideals. And then I have conversations with Tim about like, it's just about making payroll. It's just about making dollars. And it's not that Tim is just worried about that, but like has the economist.
Tim does. Please help me. Working for Tim is horrible. Help.
I said not to say that.
I guess I felt that like it's somewhere, it's trying to make that, it's trying to walk that fine balance in the middle. Like, how do you keep a business a going concern, but at the same time recognizing like what are we doing? Like, why are we doing this? I don't even mean this from a philosophical perspective. I just mean like there's other things we could be doing. Like, what are we doing here? What makes what we're doing together special at places like PICnet and Now It Matters and other places? And I think it's challenging for me as a small business. We need to be able to like keep the revenue coming in. We need to make sure that we're providing great solutions for our community, but we're not necessarily going the same capital routes that you would see some of our peers or competitors doing. Like we were one of very early B corporations, benefit corporations, like way back in 2010, 12. I don't remember how long it's been now.
Gosh. Wow.
We've got a 100-year business plan. We've never taken any venture capital money. We've never taken any like rounds of funding. That's just never been part of our business plan or our model. And that has meant like we get to turn all of our attention to the people that we get to serve. And that community around those people that we serve like is the only thing that really matters to us, and like the bigger picture, what we're tethered to for big ideas for the world as well too. So it always seems to somehow come back for me to what's the community that matters most. And the more that I can be accountable to a lot of people rather than just like one or two folks, makes me feel more comfortable with the direction our business is heading, where I'm heading, just for myself. And I really like trying to walk that fine line. But you're right, Tim. And it's a balancing act, and I think we're trying to do our best to make that work.
Well, I think something I also heard, Ryan, in what you were saying, and honestly, what you said about open source being a community of gift giving, you've told me that before. Matter of fact, you've told me that 10 years ago or more. But, the problem is, I think that the ordinary pressures of the world get in the way, right? You talk about narrow time horizons, nothing is narrower than next quarter's ACV goal, right? And you're not the only business owner I know who's thinking about a 100-year plan for a business, right? Which is a very different way of thinking about the decision-making framework in which you operate. And I think one of the things that really stands out to me in everything that you said is, connected to Tim's observation, and that is, this isn't altruism. This is creating a different economy. And it
Yeah.
is creating an economy where good acting has been incentivized, right? Now my crypto portfolio that you've advised me on is currently crashing in negative, so we're just going to ignore that for the moment.
Which
But
is an even shorter timeline, by the way, than the quarter timeline. Like, we're
that's why
talking like 4.5 days.
no, we're talking 3.5 minutes. But
Okay, yeah, there we go.
Nevertheless, like, I think there's the follow-up question I have for you, Ryan, is how does that change from the lens of small business to large business?
Right.
And why I'm asking that is because, as you know, I've stared deeply inside of the guts of large software platform business. And I can tell you that the calculations do change, but I'd love to hear in your words how these things hold up against each other.
Yeah. I think one of the things I would say, this might be timely where we are in politics in America these days, but I'm open source infrastructure guy. Like I want to make sure that the train tracks we're all riding on, that the bridges we're driving across, that the internet we're using, that the technology that we're running everything on top of, that has as much transparency and has as much accountability as possible. So for the open sourciness of it matters more than most other places. And as we become more singular, more focused to the individual, I think the open sourciness of everybody's private lives makes less sense to me. So I feel like there's definitely a range there. And I think what we're seeing now in very large corporations that are running technology stacks is that probably open source matters more than ever before. And being able to have that transparency and accountability is really critical. And I think that a lot of these larger businesses make hefty profits in a good way by providing technology stacks and infrastructure that lower the costs for innovators that are smaller businesses to be able to get up and running with things. Like, it's not just Tracy and Ryan building 2 GeoCity web pages that nobody will ever go to. Like, entire businesses are being made in months because these technology stacks are powerful enough to be able to do it. And there's been economies of scale for large corporations to make that happen. So I feel like there's, again, this sort of balancing act there. And for me, the open sourciness of it matters mostly from the infrastructure, from standards. I want us to be able to agree on the width of the train tracks. I want us to be able to agree on the opportunity for people to have access to high-speed internet. Those things really matter to me. Making sure that there's accountability around that makes sense to me. But from a very small business perspective and moving up the chain from there, I think the equation is probably different. You're right.
All right, I have one
Ryan,
follow-up, but I want to turn it over to Tim because I know he's dying. But the really quick follow is does open source matter, or does transparency and accountability matter?
Man, that's a whole episode that we're going to come back to. Everybody stay tuned. I think that's, for me, to be candid, I think the transparency, the empowerment of technology, and the accountability of it are the things that matter most to me, especially as we're moving into a world where these walled gardens of like iOS and Android and other places out there that are just all consuming now, that it can't just be about the open source software. That can't be it. It has to be like, we need to hold companies accountable for where we're holding our important private data. So that matters more to me.
I almost, I feel like I'm hearing you talk about open source in a way that makes me think you actually just think about this as public good.
Yeah.
Right. And I think that's a very, like, I think I can't get in my mind, I can't see past the licensing of it. And when I talk with you about this, what I realize is you have a world in your mind that exists and is real that the rest of us just don't understand what we're seeing. So when you talk about open source, you're talking about public good of humanity that even goes past, like, this is global public good, not even infrastructure for just a nation or, you know, hemisphere. You're talking like globally, we now have access to technology that is public good for all of humanity. And that in order for that to be okay, there does need to be transparency. And I mean, it's just such a different vision, I think, than the rest. Like, you must be frustrated that
Yes.
so few people understand
Yes.
what you're even saying, right?
There's that, and I'm I'm a hyper privileged person that happened to have won the birth lottery, if you want to call it that, from where I was born and the great parents I've had and everything else about who I just happened to be lucky to be. And I feel that's kind of rotten. I feel like not rotten for me specifically, but like there's so much that we could be doing across the world, because humans are humans and we need to do everything we can to lift each other up. And technology just knows no boundaries. Like, from my perspective, I don't want it to know. I want this to be in the hands of as many people as possible so we can really lift as many voices as we can. And I think that the thing that I struggle with is that balance of what you're just saying, which is how do we keep incentivizing all this great new technology? How do we keep businesses running with a profit motive without necessarily saying, like, what about something other than the capitalism, Ryan? And that's probably podcast number 28. But I feel like there's just
deep thoughts with Ryan Ozimek.
I feel like we started with an alphabet that had like 5 letters. And we're like, oh my gosh, that's amazing. And like over time, through open sourceness, we've been able to add more letters to this alphabet and do more things and write more words and make better books and like empower and inspire people to do great things. And I don't want those new letters of the alphabet to be like private corporate licensed letters that people need to pay to have access to. I need to make sure that as many people have access to that as possible. So that's one of the things that keeps running through my mind. I don't necessarily have all the answers to it, of course.
So I get frustrated on your behalf because I've seen some of your best work get stolen and branded. So, you know, and some of that is, some of that is what you and I experienced when we went to India to try and do an NPSP day. And the Trailhead team was like, nope, you can't do an NPSP day here. That, it has to be labeled something else. And so, like, we did, and whatever. And, and Akash, who is just like the Ryan Ozimek of India, and amazing, like, made it happen. And it was an incredible event and all of that. But I remember backing up from that and just being like, wait a minute, like, this is really kind of backwards, that something you created, that you've traveled all over, it does not add to your bottom line. Like, I've been there and we're covering burritos.
I just have
like,
penguins. This is what I'm working with.
Exactly. No,
they're good for oil.
Oh my gosh. Talk about, giving gifts to the community.
Yeah.
Like, it is not, you are not like out there championing Soapbox in NPSP days. Like, I was there. I know. I went to multiple of them, and so, how does that fit? How are you not mad about that? I'm mad about it for you. And does that factor in? Like, are you worried about that? Like, you're transparent so people see it and then they grab it and then license it, like, or it gets rebranded. Like, how do you handle that?
I don't handle it well. I handle it by going to the gym and riding on a stationary bike for hours at a time. I yell at myself into the void. I think, it is challenging. I think it's challenging because I think it's not often that people understand, especially from a corporate perspective, that I really believe that the power is in the community. And oftentimes that gets forgotten, or it's used as like a marketing tagline, like, it's all about our community. And if it's all about the community, then like we need to continue to find ways to let the community help itself in one way and then contribute to that community so it can do great things. I've seen so many great communities that have been supported, funded, helped by large corporate interests that might have their own interests, their own needs around that, but are able to continue to thrive and grow on their own. And I feel often that as soon as you move away from that and into kind of a more corporate run community, you lose a lot of the grassroots efforts, the spirit that was behind kind of those original values and what people wanted to see, because we often say the open source community is like, it's people scratching the itch, right? Like they got this itch, they want to get this problem solved. NPSPAs have always just been that. Like, it doesn't come with me, Tim, Tracy, or others saying like, here's 8 hours worth of presentations about things you must know because Tim and Tracy know it really well. It is great. Let's come together and let's figure out how to solve the problems you're facing. Like, what are the questions that you have? And I think as soon as it becomes more of a corporate approach, there's less incentive for it to be that. There's a lot more incentive to be able to say, let me lead you down a path. So the next thing that you can do to level up, to purchase this next license, is do this other thing, that I think is the thing that gets me most frustrated. And there's bureaucracy that's frustrating me, of course, because I'm a pretty anti-bureaucratic person. But I think the thing that's most frustrating to me is I just want people to come together in a way that says, this is what matters to me. This is why my organization is struggling. This is what we need to do to like help poor young LGBT community folks in Livermore like make their lives better. Like, that's what really matters. Like, let's focus on solving those problems together, not I happen to have all the answers, let me teach you the way. And that's just been the thing I've been most challenged as I see things evolve over time.
Well, there's this question of ownership and predictability, right? And it's funny you say, when communities come together on their own, like that Google group that we all used for Salesforce Landia, even if every 5th email was, please read the archive before spamming us with your questions, which was true, right? We were, when Salesforce took it over, we were promised a home in perpetuity that was ours. And that was an acceptable trade-off at the time for access to the technology. And, what is true on both sides of that equation is the questions of ownership and predictability. I think from a corporate lens, I would say the last thing you want is a bunch of unpredictable users running around punching holes in your system in front of other potential sales deals. But from a community perspective, that's exactly what you want, because it lends authenticity to the utilization of whatever tool that you've got in the first place. And similarly, like you touched on public good stuff. I mean, I won't get on my nonprofit data as a public good high horse. You've heard all about that before. But what I will say is that, we traded ownership and it didn't work out well in the long term in that circumstance. So, the idea that we should own something that is unpredictable and wild and frankly motivational is a very necessary thing, because that will never exist at scale in any company that I know. Like, no company I know says what we should do is invest in unpredictable things. And yet community is unpredictable, and it's exactly what's necessary to drive predictable innovation. And I think that's always the tension, right?
Yeah. What if I said this? Where I think community does its best job is where there's already some existing market failures, corporate failures, something else happening. Like, every time I've seen somebody say, well, this company organization is not doing this, or like this need isn't being met, or like I'm having problems with this, my response is always like, all right, let's get to work. Like, what are we doing?
The DC Marathon.
Exactly. Let's do this. Let's build community sprints. Let's make NPSP days. Let's run an unofficial marathon. Let's do it. Like, fantastic. Like, you're welcome. Let's rock and roll. And I think that comes from part of this is a bit of privilege, of course, and part of it needs to be this democratizing of empowering of individuals. And I can't solve all those problems, but it makes me really excited to be able to see those opportunities come up.
I think
Love this. Thank you.
You should know, Ryan, that maybe it's an unintended consequence, and maybe you already know about it, but there's also, and I don't mean like you're a saint, but there's a halo effect that is practical, that happens where inspiration and influence combine to actually create solutions that are otherwise unobtainable through profit. And I think people have given up on that, and you haven't. And
Yeah.
we keep dancing around it, but there is a tangible benefit there that is public good that I think you keep driving towards. And I really hope that you continue to keep that vision and that spark of like, hey, this authenticity, this transparency, this empowerment that is possible through this community doesn't need a brand behind it. It doesn't need a funding source behind it. What it needs is a need that it is meeting. And if it's got that, it will succeed. And I just think that is a really rare perspective. So I want to thank you. I know
Yeah.
lots and lots of us in the community are really grateful that you've held that position for so many years. And we're really grateful for it. Thanks for all the work that you've done.
That means a
Same.
lot. Thank you. Thank you.
Ryan, oh my goodness. I wouldn't be here now talking with you if it weren't for meeting you. You're one of the early and deepest influences in my career. And, you're also a purveyor of sunny optimism, particularly when I don't always have it. So I am deeply indebted and deeply grateful. And yeah, we should have you back because there's like 1,000 tangents that we didn't even get to today.
Totally,
so thank you.
Totally agree. Yeah.
Yeah, no, thank you guys for having me. And all this matters because we can keep making the world a better place together. So stoked that you're bringing on folks to be able to have these types of discussions and keep it up. I'll be listening.
I'm Tim Lockey.
I'm Tracy Kronzak, and you've been listening to Why It Matters.
Why It Matters is a thought leadership project of Now It Matters, a strategic services firm offering advising and guiding to nonprofit and social impact organizations.
If you like what you've heard, please subscribe, check out our playlists, and visit us at nowitmatters.com to learn more about us.